just like just like a particular tool, a particular item of equipment doesn't show up unless you have the skills for using it. In the same way, worlds only show up for people who have the skills for inhabiting them. You can compare the world of jazz music to the world of classical music. There are different roles in each of them. You don't need a conductor when you're playing jazz music. In fact, the conductor would probably get in the way and mess up the kind of fluid responsiveness and improvisation that they value so much in jazz music. So you don't need that role. The sort of tools that you use are different for each of the worlds. There's a reason why jazz music is played on the instruments that it is, and classical music is played on the instruments that it is. And of course, you can't disclose the whole world, the whole style, unless you have people who carry that style in them, who embody the jazz style. It takes the whole jazz persona to play the instruments in a jazzy way and to open up the world of practices made possible in the world of jazz music.
And you've used this, you just threw out this term like disclosing worlds, and I don't know if like we've fleshed that out in a way that would make sense to somebody. What does that mean to disclose a world? You've described now people who have skills, and you've described the worlds they inhabit. I don't understand yet what it is to disclose a world.
Heidegger coined this idea of disclosure to capture something that we're not used to thinking about, and that is the way that things only show themselves when all the conditions of skill and all the relationships between them are possible. And then the experience there is of something opening up, a space of possibilities opening up, a way of inhabiting the world opening up. And it's not like it was there all along. It's not like the world of jazz music was somewhere there in the Middle Ages, say, or in the Greek world just waiting to be discovered. It was something that had to have a space provided for it. And that's what this notion of disclosure talks about, and disclosure of worlds is trying to get at. That these worlds, these coherent, whole, organized ways of being humans in activities at objects in the world, all of that requires something to open it up.
And so Heidegger said that our job, in a way, or the best thing we can do is do this, right?
Yeah, Heidegger thought that our highest dignity as human beings, what really set us apart from everything else in the universe, was our capacity to disclose whole new worlds, to open up whole new possibilities. And now, to tie this to what we were saying earlier, it's very important that world disclosure isn't something we achieve mentally. You can't think your way into a new world. It's something you carry in, you could say you carry it in your body. It's in the skills you have, it's in the way your body is attuned to certain sorts of features and certain kinds of activities and possibilities and practices and other people.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, not just an individual carries it in the body, but it requires other people in communities and sets of practices, right?
Yeah, that's right. So all of these things hang together. You can't have, if you, again, take these subworlds, the subworld of classical music, you can't have a conductor without musicians and without composers and without audiences who attend symphony performances. It would make no sense to imagine that there was a conductor wandering around waiting for these other people to show up so that he or she could perform her skills and do her thing.
And it would be equally, and someone couldn't just decide, I'm going to be a conductor without there being these things around, right?
Yeah, if you really think about that, that would just be crazy. You know? And it would just be crazy to think I can be, say, a conductor without all this, the things, all the instruments, all the practices, and all the other people around who go into being a conductor. You can see this by.
Can you use an example from the movie, like a chef with a restaurant, or a jazz musician, or is this because we don't really go into
Sure.
the world of classical music?
Let's see, which one should we?
A chef, I think. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
you could just cook for yourself and eat, but that's not being a chef.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so it would be crazy to think that you could be a chef without all the equipment that chefs use, without the notion of a cuisine. Chefs are tied to a cuisine, without practices for putting on meals and for having people come together and sit down for a meal. Being a chef isn't just providing people food, and being a chef isn't just well, there's all sorts of things that it requires. It's not just knowing recipes. It's having the skills to bring things together and combine them in new ways, and it requires the skills to be very sensitive to all the particularities of the situation, to the particular qualities of food that you're dealing with, environmental conditions, the heat, the humidity, the altitude. All of these will affect the kind of food you prepare, but so will the people that you're cooking for, and you have to have a sense for their tastes and the way that they bring food into their practices for dining. Dining isn't just eating. Dining always encompasses a sense of bringing people together around a table and engaging in a shared set of practices, and it could be brought together by conversation, and right, but there's a whole very rich network of meanings and of practices and activities. And the moment you set to work spelling it all out, I think anyone will be struck by this, just how complex all of our human activities are and how dependent they are on this whole organized world of things.
And so I want to. All this sounds so wonderful. There is jazz and there's chef and there's there's cooks and there's all this stuff in the world, but we're in danger, it seems, of losing some of this rich world disclosure. And I'd love for you to talk about how we came to this point of danger. I think we've kind of hinted at it with the telling the story of the philosophical tradition, but there's this whole story of the history of understandings of being and where it's brought us to today and where we find ourselves in technology. Can you tell that story a little bit?
Sure. Heidegger, especially in the last few decades of his life, became obsessed with what he called the hidden history of the West. This wasn't the sort of history that historians usually talk about, things happening, battles being fought. Instead, it was the history of changes in worlds, in the way worlds came into being, endured for a while, and then they'd fall apart. And Heidegger thought that the Western tradition was marked by a number of really quite distinct worlds. The Greek world had a whole different style, and there was a whole Greek way of inhabiting the world that was lost by the transition into later worlds. Similarly, for medieval Christianity, to be a medieval Christian was to have a very different sense for the world and the relationship between people and the kind of roles that were possible than we have today. You can see this, if you just think about the way we've lost a sense for what it is to be a king or a troubadour, right? There are all sorts of roles from these worlds that are gone, and then that gives you a glimmer that something's happened, that our whole way of being in the world has changed. And Heidegger thought the modern world was also quite different. Do you want me to talk about the contents of these different worlds?
Yeah, why not? If
Okay.
we can go through them a little bit, yeah. And do you want to use the term understandings of being through these ages, or do you think that's?
Yeah, I can bring that in. Yeah.
Although it sounds like now that I think about it, it sounds like an understanding sounds a little bit in there, but.
Yeah.
Luca, a second time. Luca, you're going Chris Perez. Go with Nadine's mom today, okay? Listen, I'm working. Go with
I wanted you to
Chris
talk
Perez.
about
Go
what
with
you
Nadine's
said
mom.
about the
Go with Nadine's mom, okay?
moving more and more towards
Okay.
like
And then
planning
go
and
to the
organizing
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah, I'll bring that in just a second. Do you want me to do? Well, you'll cut it anyway. I'll do that, and I'll also talk about the contents of
Yeah, I like that.
these different ones.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, so just to give you an example, Heidegger thought that each of these worlds had, you could identify a kind of common structure to the different worlds, but the form that they took was really quite distinct. So in each world, there would be a sense of what things really were, entities really were. There would be a sense of the right organizing principle for tying them all together. They'd have a sense for what human existence was really all about. And these different elements of the worlds would cohere and hang together and give a unified sense to the world. So, for example, in medieval Christianity, Heidegger thought what entities, what things really were for the medieval Christian was determined by God's conception of them, God's idea of them. And they thought that the world was organized, all the things were ordered by their how close they would approach to God's nature. So they had a notion for in the Christian world of what they called noble metals, things like gold and silver. These were noble because they were the Christians thought they were more like God. They were incorruptible. They wouldn't rust. They wouldn't fall apart. They had a kind of brilliant shine, and so when you looked at gold, you thought that gold is much closer to God than just an ordinary stupid rock, right? Which can break and change and so on. They talked about the great order of creation in the medieval world, and it was all organized around God as the highest and greatest thing in the universe. And they understood themselves in this sense as well. The big categories of medieval Christianity were saints and sinners, which again was a mark of a saint was someone who brought themselves into conformity with God's plan, with God's vision for the universe. And a sinner was someone who rebelled against God's plan. And so all of this hung together, what things were, what human life was all about, the way the world should be organized, it all hung together nicely.
Might it be worth contrasting that with the heroes and villains in the Greek times?
Yeah, why don't you ask Bert's better on the heroes. Bert's better on Greece than I am.
Yeah, just like the contrast of the saints and sinners versus the. But it's academic history. I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. But let me contrast it with modernity.
Yeah.
Address that cable on the other side. The blue cable. Can you give me another inch?
I'll go an inch to 1 mile. Are you happy, Bert?
Oh, yeah. I was falling asleep, but I'll have to. It wasn't you were putting me to sleep, but the fact is I haven't had a nap. But it's all terrific. And so now we're going to do this is his version of the history of being.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have mine, and then you're going to
Cut them together. Yes, exactly. Ready?
I am, thank you.
The modern world, by contrast, had a very different sense of what made something an entity. Heidegger.
Wait, can you explain when you talk about the modern? Just qualify it with, because some people will think that that's.
I see. Yeah. You have to remember, philosophy is a very old discipline. It goes back to at least the 5th century BC. So when we talk about modernity, modernism starts in around 1600s, 16th century, roughly, and sorry. Okay.
Joe. Hang outside and I'll come and get the back. Thank you.
Yep.
The way Heidegger understood it, the modern age lasted from roughly the 16th century to the 20th century. We still have some elements of modernism. He now thinks we're in a different world, the technological world. I'll talk about that in a minute. But for Heidegger, the moderns had their own understanding of what things were. To be, the truth about beings consisted in that about them which could be represented by us, which could be grasped by us human beings and brought before our minds typically was the focus. So the truth of a rock, the truth of a piece of wood, was that about it which we could mentally grasp and represent. And the organizing principle, the organize.
That's gonna be your Taylor Carmen moment.
What was that?
That's his Taylor Carmen moment.
Well, they won't
Every time he
get
does
it. Will they hear the dog?
Unfortunately, yes. I thought you wouldn't have to worry about it.
It's a conversation.
Okay.
Is he barking at Joe? Didn't Joe go outside?
Yeah. Probably hear him opening the door.
Oh, is that our dogs?
Nope.
I thought someone from there, so went out that way.
He's out there.
Okay.
Okay. The organizing principle of the modern world was what Heidegger called calculability.
What is that? That sounds like thunderous.
The organizing principle of the modern world was calculability, the ability to calculate and figure out how things were going to unfold and what the relationships between them were. And human beings in the modern age were characterized by a striving for mastery and dominance. And again, you can see how all these things hang together. So we're trying to get things in our grasp, and to be an object. The truth about an object is what we can grasp. And then once we've got it in our grasp, we can calculate how it's going to interact with everything else. And what we get out of doing this is mastery. We're able to subject the world to our dominion. And if you think about the great explorers of the modern age or the conquerors of the modern age.
Let's use dominance as a word, because it's going to make it very confusing if you talk about mastery in this sense, then we talk about mastery in the
Okay, good,
sense.
good. So what humans in the modern age were all about was dominance, dominating the world, subjecting it to their will. And so if you think about the great heroes of the last several hundred years, they were explorers and scientists who cracked the code and figured out how to manipulate things and use things, or conquerors going out and bravely encountering new situations, or cowboys who had this sort of deep inner will and they could go out and subject nature and any obstacles, break down any obstacles in the path to achieving what they desired. That's for Heidegger what brings the modern world, holds it together. In technology, he thinks all of that is changing. It's in the process of changing. So
Can you introduce the concept of technology, not technology as we think of it, explain that there's a new phase of understand of a new world in the West?
Yeah. Heidegger, when he writes about technology, he's not talking about the way we often loosely use the word technology. We often think of technology as any sort of implement or device that we have for achieving a particular purpose. So we'll often write about the technological innovations of prehistoric human beings, inventing crude tools and wheels, or whatever. Heidegger wants to use the word technology to talk about our uniquely contemporary way of experiencing the world. And it's closely tied to modern machine technology. We sort of, you can understand what the technological age is all about when you get a sense for how modern technology is different than these earlier forms of technology. So once again, Heidegger will see our world, the technological world we inhabit, as having a kind of style that brings together a sense of what things are, what entities are, what human beings are, and how they all ought to be organized. In the technological world, the truth of entities, the truth of things, is found in that about them which allows them to be reconfigured and switched around and turned into something else, or broken down and transferred into something else. So you could say the truth of a lump of coal is that we've figured out how to turn it into electricity. and then we can put the electricity on reserve and hold it and store it, and take that in turn and transform it into all sorts of things. We can make it into music, we can make it into books, we can buy our Kindle or our latest technology, and the electricity becomes the poetry of Shakespeare, or it becomes infinitely flexible.
It seems that's more true of like bits and digital stuff than it is of electricity.
Yeah, especially the internet takes this, and our modern information age takes this to a whole new level, and all of human knowledge is broken down into these very simple components, which are ready and available to be called up and reconfigured and switched around and transformed and put to ever new uses. So that's what it is to be something in the modern age, the technological age. Something only really enters our world when we figured out how to use this. And I should be more careful. Things enter our world, but in a sort of deficient mode. If we haven't quite figured out how to transform things, then it's seen as resisting us, and we bring all our efforts to bear on and turning things into a technological resource that we can use in this way.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so the way we experience the weather, for example, or the weather has a tendency to resist us, and horrible natural disasters occur and destroy things, and so we have scientists at work figuring out what the basic principles of weather patterns are, with an ultimate aim to being able to manipulate the weather and to change it, and to avoid the flooding, or to you can imagine us wanting to transform the weather patterns on our planet altogether so that it doesn't interfere anymore with our activities.
And so this sounds great. We're going to want to be able to avoid floods, and we want to be able to have great things at our fingertips. What are we sacrificing with this? What's the problem, and how does this relate to what you were saying before about disclosing worlds?
Okay, well, to explain that, let me say a little bit more. So that's what things are in the technological age. What's the organizing principle in technology? You might think our world's just wide open, wild. Anything goes. There is no organizing principle anymore. And Heidegger saw that that's not quite right. This will only continue as long as we don't let things settle down into fixed patterns and fixed relationships, and start exerting friction on the kind of things that we do. So the organizing principle of the technological world is organize things in such a way that you can't be tied down and bound by what's happened before. And so there's this striving for constant ability to reconfigure. You make a decision, things happen in the technological world, and then the next moment comes and you want to do something else, move in a new direction. You have to be able to overcome whatever got you to this point. So we have all sorts of technologies designed to counteract the effects of decisions we've made previously. We have technologies for health, right, which free us from having to worry unduly about what we're doing to our bodies when we overeat or when we lay around and watch TV and so on. And then, the upshot, it sounds great, right? Technology seems to allow you unlimited freedom, unconstrained by any inherent features of the world you might encounter, and even unconstrained by your past and your mortality and the limits of these human bodies we inhabit. But one cost of having a world that's organized in this way is that nothing in the world can matter anymore. Everything becomes subject to these same technological drives to make it replaceable, make it changeable, translatable, and even our lives become just completely flexible, where there's nothing which we can encounter anywhere in the world which can really profoundly matter to us, which can make any demands on us, which can constrain us in any meaningful ways. So the freedom's great, but a complete loss of constraint just leads to emptiness and meaninglessness.
And I know yesterday we separated these two things out, but where does standardization fit on this? Like, it seems like, I mean, I'm most sensitive to this when I see people who feel like they're completely replaceable in their work because it's skillless and anybody can do it, and then the places themselves become completely interchangeable. For example, I can be in a McDonald's and it would look exactly the same wherever it is in the world. I can have access to all music and equally. It seems like everything is equally replaceable. That's the way I feel this the most. Is that something that fits this picture that you're painting?
Yeah, I think that's a mark of late modernity, right at the transition from modernity to the full-blown technological age. So if you go back to this world where what we were interested in was dominance, and we were viewed as subjects, there was a truth about our desires and our will, and we were setting out to dominate the universe and bring it under our control. Well, some of the desires we had included things like the desire to end suffering, which is perfectly understandable. And so we set about as efficiently as possible and flexibly as well, I don't know if flexibility comes in here, but as efficiently as possible to achieve this end. And efficiency demands a kind of standardization. So the most efficient way to house people is to have a few ways that you become very, very good at, and you establish techniques for doing, and then you repeat them over and over and over again. The most efficient way to feed people is to have a few ways of doing it, and then you impose it everywhere. And the most efficient way to make a broad range of goods available to everybody is to do it on a big scale, like Walmart does, and make everyone indistinguishable and have everything organized and efficiently laid out. So efficiency becomes the sort of driving concern of a certain form of mastery, a certain form of dominance, of trying to dominate the world.
And it seems like, I mean, if we're going to kind of mush together a little bit efficiency and flexibility, which I think I might have to do, it seems in both of these situations, you have this stark contrast with the picture, with what we've been seeing with these jazz musicians and poets and chefs, that people aren't showing up as mattering, and their worlds aren't organized, and they aren't receptive to forces outside of themselves. Can you maybe show this, talk about this, what we've, this nihilism that seems to come about, and what we're risking losing, and then how we might go about, if we can, bringing it back. I mean,
Yeah. Can we take a break?
Yes. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's take a break.
About the nihilism we're risking losing, what you were saying.
No, sorry, that's not what I meant to say. I misspoke. I meant the nihilism and what we risk losing in this